Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger, thank you for having us this weekend. My name is Bo Clayton, and I'm from Durham, North Carolina. One of the reasons that we are all here is that you're great storytellers, and we carry those stories back home with us. Can you please share a couple stories that maybe we haven't heard before about Mr. Abel and Mr. Jane that capture their character and their caliber as leaders?
Well, I'll start out with the Jeep. He walked into the office in 1986, and I'd gotten the bright idea of going into the reinsurance business, I think in maybe 1969. So I'd stumbled along for 17 years, and I had a wonderful guy that ran it, but he also liked certain brokers, and I mean, he was running it the traditional way, the top quality and everything else. But he fell into he didn't try and change the system. He tried to improve the system, and to some degree. And we went nowhere. 17 years wandering around in the wilderness, and I thought I knew we could have something good. And then Ajit came in on a Saturday, and Mike Goldberg had steered him in, I think, and Mike deserves to be enshrined in perpetuity for that act. And I talked with him a while. I think maybe I was opening the mail on Saturday while I talked with him, and he had absolutely zero experience with insurance, but he'd actually seen a good bit of how corporate America operated because he'd been in management consulting. And after talking with him, I knew I'd struck gold, and so I hired him and gave him the backing of some money, and we had a very good period in the market almost right away for him to act. And Ajit, if I had the top pick of 10 insurance managers in the world, I could take all 10, and they wouldn't. You can't replace Ajit. And we still enjoy talking. We don't talk as frequently as we used to, but we used to talk about every day. But he's one of a kind, and if they're going to stick around long enough, you only need one of a kind. Paul Andrews stuck around at TTI, had all the money in the world. Every time I talked to him about getting a raise or something of the sort, he said, "We'll talk about that next year." He was not what you get when you get the top draft picks from the leading business schools. And I will say this, I have never looked at where anybody went to school in terms of hiring. I mean, I just, somebody mailed me a resume or something, I don't care where they went to school. And it just so happens that Ajit went to some pretty good schools, but he isn't Ajit because he went to the schools. And Charlie, you can tell a story or two. How'd you find Louis Vincenti?
Well, he was there.
But you got to recognize him.
I asked Louis once how he managed to play first-string football at, I think, Stanford, when he only weighed 165 pounds. And he said, "Well," he says, "I was pretty quick." And he was pretty quick. We have found a lot of people within our companies who are pretty quick. It's a...
Yeah, we had one guy that quit at fourth grade, didn't Ben Rosner? Am I wrong?
Oh, yeah, totally self-educated. Ben Rosner knew more about retailing in difficult neighborhoods than anybody. And he watched everything in his business like a hawk, and he was amazing. Now, there was an example we never found anybody who could do what, when Ben died, that ability left us.
Yeah, and you want a story, it's kind of interesting because Ben Rosner had a partner, Leo Simon. And Leo Simon was Mo Annenberg's son-in-law. And Leo, therefore, was very, very, very wealthy. And Ben started with nothing, but they liked each other. And one time, well before they got involved in the business, of the business we bought, but they got the idea of buying a submarine from World War I and taking it to the Century of Progress, which was the World's Fair, in effect, in Chicago, I think in 1933. So they bought the submarine for practically nothing. And they figured, the average guy from Omaha was going to his first World's Fair, get into a submarine for a quarter or something, that they'd pay it. So they hauled it from Florida, wherever they hauled it to Chicago, and then they got into Chicago, and they were hauling a submarine down the streets of Chicago, and it was creating traffic problems like nobody could imagine. So a cop came over, and he said to Ben, he says, "Where do you think you guys are going with that submarine?" And Ben says, "Well, I don't." He says, "You'll have to talk to my partner, Mr. Capone." The cop says, "You're on, just keep going." And that was Ben Rosner. And then Leo Simon died. And when he died in 1967 or so, Ben Rosner kept delivering half the profits to his widow, who was incredibly rich, of course, being Mo Annenberg's firstborn daughter. I think Mo had nine girls in a row before Walter came along. The 10th, I may be off by one, but anyway, I went to this fancy apartment, and anyway, Ben kept her in for half the deal, and he had her sign the rent checks, just so she would look like she was doing something in this business. And she didn't need the money, obviously, but he just felt he was obligated once his partner Leo died. And then she started criticizing him. And at that point, Ben went to his lawyer, or was her lawyer actually, Will Feldsteiner. I don't know whatever happened to Will, but he gave me a call because Ben wanted to call me because he wanted me to buy it. And he wanted me, if I bought it, he'd be rid of the ex-partner's wife, and he had me and Charlie come back, and we went to Will Feldsteiner's office, and Ben says, "I'll work till the end of the year, and that's all. But I'll sell you this thing for $6 million, and it had $2 million of cash and a couple of million of real estate and a couple of million of operating earnings." It was just crazy. But he felt if he was getting a lousy price, she was taking a half of a lousy price for half the money. So he looked at me at some point. "Charlie, you describe the rest of it." Look at it.
He said, "I hear you're the fastest draw in the West." He says, "Draw."
We're in the New York lawyer's office.
Yeah.
And this guy he's selling his baby. And he told us he was leaving. I got Charlie on the side. I said, if this guy leaves at the end of the year, you can throw away every psychology book that's ever been written. I mean, it isn't going to happen. So we bought it, and we lived happily ever after with Ben. And one time, he was taking me over to see a property we had in Brooklyn. And along the way, I said, "Ben, I promised you I wouldn't interfere in the business when we started." And he knew a butt was coming. And he just said, "Thank you, Warren." And that shut me up. He was a lot of fun. We had so many Ben Rosner stories, but now you've heard one that hasn't been published before.